Conversations with Niki is brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets. Well, welcome to Conversations with Niki. I am Niki Seberini. I'm so happy to be with you, and thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome our syndication partner listeners, and that is Eldo's FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Knysna FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. I'd like to welcome you all. And just a reminder over and over again, the website www.conversationswithniki.co.za, and all the latest shows are there. You just give us a day after the show, update it. It is there. So if there's part of a conversation that you miss, you'll be able to catch it up. The podcasts are there. Also, we do put the podcasts, the link to the podcast on Twitter and on the Facebook page. So you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @Seberini. That's Seberini, or you can go to my Facebook page, which is Conversations with Niki. And if you like it, then once again, every time we post those, the links to the podcast, you will be sent that. Wow, do we have a great show in store for you today? Because really, today is about challenging your belief system. Now, I'm not talking about religion, and I'm not talking about politics. We're going to leave that alone. That gets far too controversial. I'm talking about your beliefs around what you put in your mouth, about what you should and shouldn't eat, about what is healthy and what is not, optimum health, energy. We're going to be looking at all of that today. And we're going to be giving you examples. Professors are going to be putting their point across, or a professor is going to be putting his point across, nutritionists, chefs, endurance athletes, a person who's actually gone through this new way of eating. And then at the end of the show, you're going to have the opportunity to decide for yourself whether you are going to change, whether you're happy the way you are. And it's just an opportunity to, as I say, challenge the way you are, your status quo when it comes to what you eat. Now, let me tell you about one of the guests who's coming onto the show, and that is Professor Tim Noakes. Now, Professor Tim Noakes of the Sports Science Institute in Cape Town, he has run so many marathons. He has written so many books. And it was years ago that he wrote a book, The Law of Running. And in the book, he identified the importance of carbo loading. You know that term. I'm sure you're familiar with the term of carbo loading. So if I'm going to be racing, if I'm going to be doing something, I need to take in as many carbs as possible, because that's going to give me the energy I need to finish the race. And that's what Professor Tim Noakes said. Then, in 2010, he came out with another book. And this book was called Challenging Beliefs. And that's exactly what he did. He said, whoops, I made a mistake. That's big enough. I think it's huge as a professor to then write a book and say, sorry, I was wrong about the carbo loading. And in fact, he said that it's not about carbo loading. It's about lowering the amount of carbs that you eat, or rather reducing carbs completely and increasing your fat intake. And he lost a fortune of weight. He all of a sudden had this incredible energy, brilliant health. And the rest of the world, well, certainly here in South Africa, be it doctors, dietitians, they were absolutely horrified. They criticized him. They thought that he was irresponsible to talk about and write about this new way of eating. And now, 3 years down the line, he has come out with the most delicious recipe book. He got together what he calls the crack team, and that is Sally Ann Creed, who's a nutritionist, and Jono Proudfoot and David Greer, who are not only chefs, but they are great sportsmen. They are these endurance sportsmen, so they've applied this new way of eating. And they got together and they put this most, and I have to say, delicious, mouth-watering recipe book together, because every single recipe I look at is delectable. And then I ask myself, oh, is this like a diet book? But maybe that's actually where I'm wrong, because this way of eating is not a diet book. It is, in fact, a new way of eating, a new way of being. So let me start by bringing some of the guests onto the show immediately. I'm going to start off with Jono Proudfoot. Jono, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Morning, Nikki. Thanks for that great introduction.
Listen, you've been busy, hey?
Yeah, things have been quite busy over the last few months.
Oh, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And also we have Sally Ann Creed, who's the nutritional therapist. Sally, hi.
Hello.
And welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So I have to start off by asking you, Jono, because you are, you're an endurance athlete. You swim and you really, really push yourself to the limit. How is it that you came across Professor Tim Noakes and this new way of eating?
So it's interesting you say that. So I came across it actually when my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, she lost 20 kilograms after reading Tim Noakes' News 24
20
article.
kilograms?
Yeah,
wow.
Quite substantial. And I'd always been interested in sort of sports performance food, being a chef and obviously quite sporty, but I'd never really found anything that really tickled my fancy. And carb loading was sort of old news, and when this came out, it grabbed my attention. And so actually, after experimenting with it and seeing how well it worked, and obviously seeing the weight loss that a few people experienced, I jumped on the bandwagon and sort of started having conversations about doing a book, and that's sort of where it started from. That was my inspiration.
And Jono, did you also have these incredible results?
Yeah, so my results weren't as hardcore. I've lost 14 kilograms actually since I started writing the book.
I would say that's pretty hardcore.
Yeah, but I was also doing a hell of a lot of exercise.
Okay.
I recently swam from Mozambique to Madagascar, and I lost a substantial amount of weight doing that.
She was.
So I unfortunately can't credit it all to the diet, but what I do feel is that my appetite is completely under control. You know, when you exercise, your appetite goes through the roof, and if you're not eating carbohydrates and sugar, your appetite is totally under control, and you don't crave and binge. But the main thing I noticed was my sports performance. I didn't feel the need to drink so many energy drinks, and I didn't need to eat nearly as much as I did when I used to train. And obviously, when you're at the right pace, you have a lot more endurance when you're running on fat than you do running on carbs.
So let me just rewind for a moment. So you swam from Mozambique to Madagascar.
Yes.
And you're telling me that you did not take in any carbs?
Oh, no. So, yeah, please, thank you for correcting that. No, when I was on the boat, I was with a crew of about 7 people, and we basically ate whatever we could. Funnily enough, on the boat, I ate a pretty much old-school high-carb diet, and I only lost 3 kilograms. But we swam 450 kilometers in 24 days. So what that tells me is that exercise does not assist in weight loss whatsoever. It's completely diet-related.
Okay. This is, my mind is spinning, and I'm sure people who are listening are also going, hang on, slow down. So this is when I'm going to bring Sally in, because Sally, you're Sally Ann, sorry, you're a nutritional therapist. So you know what foods are good, and you know how to combine the foods to get the maximum benefit from them. So when you hear of a low-carb, high-fat diet, when you first heard of that, was it a shock to the system, or is that something that you had been advocating?
Well, I was actually trained along those lines to start with, fortunately, around 20 years ago. I studied in Australia, and it's pretty much what I was taught, and it's really what I've actually used on a lot of patients over the last 20 years, and it's really the only thing that works effectively in almost every sort of disease and in weight loss. So it's something that I've known about for a long time and advocated.
So, what was it like being a nutritional therapist in a time when everyone was talking about low-fat diet and eating carbs and combining carbs with protein when, this was your diet?
Yeah, extremely difficult. And I think that all of us have had a lot of flack as a result of this. And I suppose that I kind of flew under the radar quite a lot, in those early years. I was very nervous to bring this out in talks I did or a book I wrote or anything like that. It's only the last few years that I've been brave enough to stand up and speak out about it. But I've very much lived like this over the last 20 years, and I put a lot of patience on to this kind of lifestyle.
Okay.
But I know that others in this industry are completely opposed to this sort of thing, and they really get very aggressive about it.
I can imagine.
You know?
But what is interesting about this book is, I mean, Professor Tim Noakes puts a lot of scientific findings behind it. I mean, there are these graphs and there's results on tests that have been done, and I mean, the findings are all here. But Jonna, I started off and I actually said to you, how did you come across this? You told me about your introduction to it, but how did you come across the professor to then join up with David and join up with Sally Ann to put this recipe book together?
So it actually came out of a sort of philanthropic adventure. In planning the swim, a friend of mine and I approached David for advice on how to go about doing the swim, because he had kayaked over the channel. And he said, cool, well, why don't you join into my charity, which is Miles for Smiles. They provide free corrective surgery for cleft lips.
Yes.
And or for children born with cleft lips. And he said, come do the adventure with us. We'll guide you through it, and then you can help raise money for charity. And then using the skills that I have, obviously being a chef, I decided to actually do a cookbook based on the diet we'd be following, and then try and use that cookbook to raise money for the charity. So first I asked, and I happened to be following the so-called Tim Noakes diet at the time. And so then one thing led to another, and I ended up approaching Sally Ann, who Prof tweeted about. And then we approached Tim, and that's how he got involved in the book. So it started off just being a book, and we were going to ask him to write a brief introduction. And then as things picked up momentum, we all started working really well as a team together, and it became this giant project. But we still raised a lot of money for charity. 5 rand for every copy sold is going to Miles for Smiles, and I think we've sold about 95,000 copies.
95,000 copies.
Almost 500,000 rand we've managed to raise for Miles for Smiles. So.
That is brilliant. And just the fact that you've sold 95,000 copies, because I know walking into certain bookshops and they just out of stock, which just says that South Africans are interested, they want to know more, and perhaps we're looking towards becoming a lot healthier if people are following this whole real meal revolution, as you say, changing the world one meal at a time. So I have to ask you, Sally, and did you have anything to do with the copy? Because I think that the copy is wonderful. This is quite a serious topic, the way Professor Tim Noakes has had to explain insulin resistance and the role of fat versus carbs, etc. But it's written in such a light-hearted, almost tongue-in-cheek way, with alluding to titles of books and movies. Did you have much to do with that?
No, I think that was mainly our editor, who is Tudor Caradoc Davies. He's just got a wonderful way of editing. And I think that Jono's writing is also superb. So it's kind of a mixture of those two. I don't think it's certainly not me.
but do you enjoy it? I mean,
absolutely, we love it.
The end result is great. So you sat down with Jono and with David, the other chef, and how did you start planning the book? I mean, did you feel that you were quite limited in putting the book together? I mean, I know you've advocated this way of eating, as you've said, for many years, but was it a little bit limiting having to come up with a delicious recipe book?
Well, I didn't actually do any recipes. I mean, that was mainly Jono and David's job. And he also sort of put a structure together, and he asked us all to do various things. So it was really very, very easy. And I must admit that I don't know if it would have been as quick and easy if he hadn't have managed it as he did. So really, John is an amazing project manager, so kudos to him on that, It was extremely easy to follow Jono's lead there.
And Jono, when the two of you then sat down, you and David, I mean, what was your objective? To make these meals look and taste as delicious as possible? Because when I see delicious meals, I think hard work, but it's actually not a lot of hard work.
Yeah, I mean, we did. So the main objective was to make it easy, You know, when you're trying to get someone to change the way they eat, it has to be appealing. And that's why I think a lot of diet books actually lose their way, because if a diet doesn't look sexy, enticing, and really delicious, it feels like you're restricting yourself. So what we did was ask Sally Ann to give us constraints. You know, we put a whole lot of sample recipes together, and she looked at them and said, okay, you can't use that, you can't do this, you must add more of this or whatever. But our goal was just to have really, really beautiful and delicious recipes that would make it feel appealing, like you're not just sacrificing carbohydrates, but you're giving yourself an opportunity to really, really indulge in deliciousness.
I mean, I'm drooling just looking at the pictures. I really, really am. It's not often that I pick up a book and think, my goodness, I can't believe this is part of a new way of eating, that one can lose weight. Sally, and I'm going to be saying goodbye, but I just want to ask you, I mean, the end result, when you looked at these dishes, you must have had this great sense of pride that you were a part of this incredible project.
It's been such a privilege, I cannot tell you. And it's been life-changing, I think, for all of us, especially as it seems to be the only book ever to change a nation's eating. And everybody you speak to is banting. So, yeah, it's been an amazing privilege, and we've all loved it.
I'm sure. Well, Sally Ann, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great.
Thank you, Niki.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Johnny, we're going to hopefully get David on the show as well in a few moments. But I'm just looking through the book. So, for example, the first thing I think of is I really enjoy my muesli in the morning.
Yeah.
And I'm told that oats is the red zone. You know, you are not allowed to eat oats. And I thought, well, what on earth am I going to have for breakfast? My husband said, well, I'm sick and tired of eating eggs every morning for breakfast. And then, of course, I open the book, and what do I see? That there's a nut granola.
Yes.
and you've got all sorts of nuts. So it's walnuts and sunflower seeds and chopped hazelnuts and almond flakes and coconut oil and cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg. And you talk about using whole, full cream yogurt on top. And I look at that and I think, but surely I'm going to put on a fortune of weight.
Yeah, no, it's... So, I'm sure Prof will touch on that when he speaks to you just now, but the main thing, so what we looked at was what you can't eat, and that's where we started. So the first thing is you should limit your intake of foods that contain more than 5% carbohydrate, because then generally you can eat quite a lot of food and not actually go over 50 net grams of carbs in a day. So that obviously, removing everything you can't use was very easy.
Yeah.
You just look on the back of a label, and if it says more than 5 grams per 100 grams, just put it back on the shelf and walk away. But for instance, double thick Greek yogurt is an amazing appetite suppressant. And the whole idea of eating high fat is that if you eat high fat, nutrient dense foods, your appetite will be suppressed. So we just looked at high fat, nutrient dense foods, and there are actually thousands of them. And that's what we used to build a menu and build a recipe. And the other thing we used was, what do people want and what are they giving up? And you're giving up mashed potatoes, you're giving up pasta, and you're giving up bread. So the most important thing, and rice. So that's why we've got that basic section in the beginning of the book, because as you open it, you're like, okay, I'm giving up bread, now what? And there you have a bread recipe, and you're sort of empowered and enabled to continue living normally, but just avoiding the gluten and the wheat.
So here's cauliflower rice that I'm looking at.
Yes.
And then instead of potato mash, it's mashed cauliflower or cauli mash.
Yeah.
You have a carb-free pasta.
Yes.
And then you have courgette noodles, and you have carb-free bread. So you've taken all of that, and you've said as you said to the carb lovers, don't worry. But now let's talk about the taste, because I haven't yet had the time to make any of it. Is there a huge, obviously cauliflower mash tastes like cauliflower.
Yes.
But how about the bread and the pasta?
So the bread and the pasta, the bread is its own issue. Flaxseed has quite a sort of bitter aftertaste. So what we've put there is the most basic sort of neutral as we could get it, recipes. So the bread, for instance, you can add aniseed. I've also recommended you can add butternut and feta, if you like, into it to give it a bit more body and obviously a little bit more interesting flavor. The cauliflower mash, I think, is absolutely amazing. I prefer it to mashed potato because it's actually got a flavor. But one can take any of those things and add their own flavoring. For instance, the courgette noodles would be great just tossed around with a bit of pesto and served with a bolognese sauce, or just tossed around in a bit of pesto in a pan just to soften them a little bit. And then the same with the noodles, or the pasta. That pasta would be perfect if you're not lactose intolerant, to be boiled in a delicious cream sauce with some parmesan, maybe a bit of bacon or crispy smoked chicken. You know, there's a lot more you can do with the basics than just eat them as they are.
I mean, most of the recipes that I'm looking at, I mean, the fats are there. They're there in full force. And when we're talking about the fats, you spoke about the Greek yogurt, that full cream Greek yogurt. I mean, have you walked into a supermarket? Do you know how difficult it is to find full cream yogurt or full cream dairy products? They just don't exist anymore. It's all low fat or no fat.
Yeah, and double thick Greek is a scarce commodity these days. So that's actually something we're trying to do. We want to encourage producers to actually get back into full cream and full fat dairy. And what's ironic is that a lot of the companies that are selling their cream cheese as low fat cream cheese are actually selling 20% fat cream cheese. So it says it's low fat, but it's not. Fat-free is a whole other story, but you know, cream cheese as a whole is actually full fat, regardless of what it says on the label.
Okay, so we look at breakfast. So you've said you can have that muesli.
Yeah.
Is this something that's going to keep you full for a long time? It's just a whole lot of nuts, and then you'd add a little bit of fruit and a little bit of yogurt. I know that you have to be careful with fruit, because it is considered as carbs.
Yes.
So is that like a danger? Let me not use the word dangerous, but if you're going to have that muesli or granola with the little bit of fruit and a little bit of yogurt, is that pushing the boundary a lot?
No, I think so berries are lower in carbs than most other fruits, and you can see your limit, your berry intake limit on the orange list. We've got them listed there. So you shouldn't go over that, otherwise, you know, you'll click back out of fat burning mode and into sort of fat gaining mode. But see, the key is to avoid the carbs, and if you avoid the carbs, you'll instantly notice your appetite decreases. For the first 3 or 4 days, you'll crave them because your body wants those carbs for their energy. And as soon as you get over that hump, you click into this mode where your body doesn't need carbs for energy, because it's burning your fat and converting it into ketones, which you then use for energy. So yes, that is a perfectly normal sized portion, and it should keep you full until well after lunchtime. Okay.
I also like those little crispy, made out of seeds. What are they? They're like those little crackers.
Those with liver pate are incredible.
Okay. Now, I am addicted, I have to confess, to sugar. I am absolutely addicted. And I know I have a cheek looking at a new way of eating recipe book and going, but where's the sweet stuff? But Jono, where's the sweet stuff?
That's controversial, the sweet stuff. And we all have different opinions. So the sweet stuff, so sugar is the real devil. And sugar also drives appetite. You know, if you put a sticky glaze on ribs, you can eat a lot more ribs than you'd be able to if you had a sort of savory spice rub on them. But so you can use sweeteners, but the thing is, people crave sweetness. So if you remove sweetness altogether, you're probably going to be a lot safer. And that's actually the key. Prof Noakes is adamant that any sweetness is to be avoided, because if you have a sugar-free piece of cheesecake, all of a sudden you think, oh, well, that was delicious. You know, maybe I should just have something more, and you keep craving sweetness. So best to just get over the craving and get over the addiction and move on. But yeah, you know, to say to someone, you're never going to eat anything sweet again in your entire life, it's a bitter pill to swallow, if you'll excuse the pun.
It is. It really, really is. Do you, you know, it's great, because not only did you put these meals together, but this is something you do. You live this new way of eating every day. But confess.
Yes.
We won't tell anyone.
On air,
no one will know. But do you break down? And I shouldn't say break down again, because it's a way of eating. So let's say you're invited out, for example, and someone gives you something that is a no-no in terms of what you should be eating. Well, what do you do?
Okay, so that's also a very good question, and it's valuable. And that's the first thing you need to remember, is that everyone has a different level of insulin resistance or carb tolerance. I would say I hover around being tolerant to about 100 grams of carbs a day, and I'm not diabetic, and I don't have the potential to become diabetic yet. So I'm able to have a sweet potato or a potato occasionally, And if I'm at a friend's house and they've prepared, I mean, now people are obviously quite weary, but in the past, in the past,
they just don't invite you anymore.
Yeah, they just leave Jono. But you know, you have to know your own limits. And I say that to people. You know, if you are strict and you are in danger or you are diabetic, then you know people need to understand it's the same as being a vegetarian. You don't eat meat and you disagree. You are allergic to carbohydrates, and eating them will make you uncomfortable and overweight. And you need to be quite firm and strong about that, and prepared. You know, if you know you're going for dinner, eat something before you go. You know, and then if they do offer you something that doesn't suit you, you can just say no, thank you, and eat around it.
Okay.
But yeah, so I do have the occasional cheat. I try to stay away from refined carbohydrates, but you know, every now and then I'm safe to have a treat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say no more. Well, Jono, thank you so much. It's been so lovely. Unfortunately, we couldn't get hold of David, but you know, we've got a lot out of you. And just to say that, I mean, you put a beautiful book together. These recipes are quite exquisite, and I'm looking very forward to making a whole lot of things. I already went out this morning and got a whole lot of cauliflower for that cauliflower mash.
Oh, brilliant.
My husband instructed me, so there's a whole new way of cooking. So thanks, Jono.
Thanks for having me.
Jono Prophet, it's been great. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks so much. So I'm wondering at this point how you are feeling about all of a sudden being told about this, the real meal revolution, changing the world one meal at a time. This book put together by Professor Tim Noakes, Sally Ann Creed, Jono Proudfoot, and David Greer. So there's a mom at my son's school, and I've noticed over the past few months that she seems to be getting smaller and smaller. Her clothes are looking bigger. Now she's actually bought clothes that fit this new small petite size that she's become, and I couldn't help myself but go up and ask her, you know, and just say, you're looking great. And she said, well, in fact, I went out and bought the Real Meal Revolution, and in fact I got Professor Tim Noakes to sign it. I think she was in Cape Town at the time, and I've lost 8 kilograms since then, and I have never felt better. I've got so much energy, I feel fantastic, and it is wonderful. And I thought that would be a great way of introducing Professor Tim Noakes, just to know the kind of impact that he's having on so many people around South Africa. I think we have Professor Noakes on the line. Prof?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, hello.
So she said that you probably don't remember, but you signed her book. She's very, very happy about the fact that you signed her book, and that she's lost 8 kilos and is feeling fantastic.
They're brilliant. Yeah, well, the beauty of this is that I get feedback like that every 2 minutes. Not every 2 minutes, but, you know, literally by the hour. People are just telling me how well they're doing on this eating plan. Yeah.
I started off the show talking about how in the beginning you advocated this carbo loading, and then you came back and you said, sorry, I made a mistake. Actually, what really works is the low carb, high fat.
Yes.
I want to know how you came to that decision. How was it through you changing your way of eating? Was it through doing a little bit of research?
Thank you. I was preaching the conventional wisdom, which is what I was taught, and I was taught that, and in fact we did a whole lot of research on how carbohydrates made you perform better during exercise. And generally, if you take athletes who are pretty healthy and give them more carbohydrate, they tend to perform better. The problem is we don't know what the long-term consequences are of eating the high carbohydrate diets. We just assume it's healthy, and it turns out it's not healthy if you're like me and you're insulin resistant. So I ate this fabulous high carbohydrate diet for 33 years, and all it did was make me fat, and it made me run much slower, and ultimately I got type 2 diabetes. Now, I was doing everything.
You got type 2 diabetes. You were this fit athlete.
Type 2 diabetes. I'm on medication for it. And I did everything I was told to do. I ate this low-fat diet. I used to reward myself and say, gee, you didn't eat any fat today. That's amazing. And I was running, and I ran all these marathons and thought I was doing good for myself. But I forgot one little problem. My father died of diabetes, and that puts me at a 10-fold greater risk of diabetes.
Sure.
And I didn't watch that because I didn't understand it, because I thought, but I'm doing everything I possibly can. So eventually, to cut a long story short, I had a terrible run one morning, and I decided something must give, and I went on the internet, and then I found this book called The New Atkins for the New You, and it said lose 6 kilograms in 6 weeks without hunger. And the without hunger was what interested me. And the fact that I knew the three authors who were serious scientists, and I said, how could they possibly link to Atkins? I mean, Atkins killed us all because he told us to eat high-fat diets. And I bought the book, and within an hour I decided that they had discovered this truth and that Atkins was probably right. And I went on the diet, and spectacular results. Within 6 weeks, I dropped 8 kilograms. My running improved. It just was unbelievable how it improved. And everything about me improved. And I didn't say a word. But people saw I was a lot thinner. And they started asking questions. And then the criticism started. And I still kept a low profile until I was on carte blanche with my great friend Derek Watts, who had gone on the diet, lost 8 kilograms, and was very naughty in some of the things he asked me.
Okay.
and then I was on radio with John Robbie, and he asked me exactly the question you asked me. And then it went viral that Tim Noakes has completely reversed what he was saying. And then people wanted to know. And then the attacks started coming from left, right, and center. And so I had to start defending myself, and so I started writing a bit more about the story. I still wasn't absolutely convinced that I understood it, but now, 4 years later, or 3.5 years later, I've read so much that I know absolutely that this is one statement that you cannot contest, and that is, if you have insulin resistance, you may not eat carbohydrates. You must restrict your carbohydrates. And that statement will stand forever.
Okay.
As correct. So then the question is, well, how do I know if I've got insulin resistance? What percent of the population have insulin resistance? And those are other questions we can debate.
Well, let's start off by asking, what is insulin resistance?
In my profession teaches that when you are lazy and you overeat, you're gluttonous, you put on weight, and then you become insulin resistant, which means that you don't metabolize carbohydrate normally, and you convert the carbohydrate into fat, so it compounds the problem. But my profession says as long as you lose the weight, and it doesn't matter how you do it, you will reverse the insulin resistance and you will become normal, and then you can start eating the foods you want to eat. That doesn't work because it is wrong. My view is that you are born with varying grades of insulin resistance, from 0, which means you're absolutely insulin sensitive, or to grade 6, where you're like me, profoundly insulin resistant. And if you're a grade 6 and you eat high carbohydrate diets, you will develop diabetes by 40 or 50 or 60 or whatever. Now, what insulin resistance is, it's an inability of the body to respond normally to insulin. And we secrete insulin every time we eat carbohydrates. Now, because our insulin doesn't work properly in getting the glucose out of the bloodstream, we have to over-secrete insulin. So we over-secrete insulin, and that sorts out the glucose problem, but it causes a whole bunch of other problems. And if you chronically over-secrete insulin every 3 hours because you're eating a high-carbohydrate diet, then you get a whole range of other conditions. Your blood pressure goes up, your cholesterol goes wrong, and you become obese and ultimately develop diabetes.
Okay, Prof, we're going to take a very quick break and we're going to continue with this fascinating conversation. Stay with us.
Hi, my name is S.V. Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za.
Plan your listening by visiting Radio Today's website at 1485.org.za and click on the Schedules link.
Well, welcome if you've tuned in. Lovely to be with you. I'm Niki Seberini, and this is Conversations with Niki, welcoming our syndication partner listeners. That's Eldo's FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Neisner FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. We are having such an interesting conversation. I have Professor Tim Noakes on the line, and we're talking about his book that he's teamed up with the crack team. That's Sally Ann Creed, a nutritionist, and John O'Proudfoot and David Greer. They're both they're both chefs and also endurance sportsmen, and we're talking about this book that's really taken certainly South Africa by storm in terms of the way we eat and the way we see ourselves eating from today and going into the future. And Professor Tim Noakes was talking about being insulin resistant, and how do we know if we are insulin resistant? And Prof, that's when I'm going to bring you back in, because I don't think there's one particular way of knowing. You've got to assess whether you are losing weight if you're eating carbs. How else would you be able to tell whether you're insulin resistant or not?
Yeah, that's a great point. Jeff Volek, who's one of the world authorities on this condition, says the best way to determine whether you're insulin resistant is your response to this diet. And if you respond appropriately, then it's highly probable you're insulin resistant. Of course, in the laboratory, we can measure it, and we can put you on the scale of 0 to 6, but that's a 3-hour test, and it's expensive and it's unnecessary. But just as a general statement, the key is to measure what your glucose is in the bloodstream. If it's perpetually elevated, then it damages a lot of proteins, and the one protein in the blood that it affects is hemoglobin, which is very prevalent in your blood. And the glucose sticks to the hemoglobin, and it changes it and becomes what's called glycated hemoglobin. So the higher your glucose is during the day, meaning the more insulin resistant you are, the higher your glycated hemoglobin value will be. And once it goes over 5.5, we know that predicts you will develop diabetes if you continue to eat carbohydrates. So that is a very good test. And if your value for glycated hemoglobin is 5.5 or below, you're okay. You're probably fine on the diet you're eating. If it's above 5.5, and it doesn't matter what age you are, you're at risk. You will develop diabetes in due course. It might take 10 years, it might take 30 years, but you're at high risk of developing diabetes. But the beauty is, you cut your carbohydrates, in 3 months your hemoglobin, your glycated hemoglobin, will go back to 5.5 or below. And that means you're on the right track. You're going away from diabetes, not towards diabetes. And can I just finish up by making this very important point? The disease that is destroying this nation is diabetes. It is not heart disease. We should be eating to prevent diabetes, not heart disease. The focus is completely wrong. We all focus just on heart disease. Heart disease is an uncommon condition. It affects 1 in 3,200 males in any 1 year under the age of 65. So it's a very uncommon condition. I'm not saying it's not important. Diabetes is the disease we have to address.
What happens if you are not insulin resistant and you go on this diet? Does it then become bad to eat these high fats? Because I'm bringing in the fats as well, because you spoke about heart disease, and the people's instant reaction will be, well, you can't eat the fat on a steak, or you can't eat full cream yogurt because it's not good for your heart.
You see, that's where it's completely wrong.
Okay.
If you are insulin resistant, it is carbohydrates which drive all the determinants of heart disease. It is not fat. Fat reverses all the abnormalities.
Okay.
And that's where we got it completely wrong. So the link between fat and heart disease is completely spurious. And there's a book came out last week, Nina Teichholz, called The Big Fat Surprise: Why Your Perfect Diet Should Include Butter, Meat, and milk. Butter, milk, and cheese. And what she does is she goes back to pre-1977, which is when the dietary guidelines changed, and she looks at the science that made us change our diets to low fat. And she says it is junk science. There is no science linking a high-fat diet to heart disease. It was made-up science driven by industry.
So it's a lie. We've been living and eating a lie, really.
Read the books. That's what I believe. Yeah. And you see, industry got behind it, and the industries that would benefit from us taking saturated fat out of the diet, particularly the vegetable oil industry, drove the fear of saturated fat for their own interests. And then all of a sudden it turns out that vegetable oils, polyunsaturated, hydrogenated polyunsaturated fats, are really unhealthy and damage your health, where there is no such similar evidence for saturated fat. So we took out what was good in the diet and replaced it with what was bad. And now, sooner or later, people are going to have to put up their hand like I did and say, okay, Tim Noakes was wrong. He said you should not eat fat, you should eat carbohydrates. The people who told us to replace saturated fat with vegetable oils are going to have to come up and say, sorry guys, we were wrong. Similarly, those people who said you must eat a low-fat diet to prevent heart disease must come out and say, we were wrong.
Prof, you talk about going back to, well, almost, how we were, how our ancestors were, almost caveman days when we would eat meat, and there would obviously be fat in our diet as well. And you talk about 3 things that happened in the past, and that was during the times of the ancient Egyptians, when they started the agricultural years really, and you started to get grain. You spoke about in the 70s as well, when you had all this processed carbohydrates coming out. Is it not a case of, a lot of people are talking about blood types. So you get the O positive blood type, which naturally would go towards your way of eating, I would say. What about those people who they don't really like protein? You have people who aren't drawn to protein at all.
Oh, absolutely. The diets that help, you either must eat lots of fat and no carbohydrate, or you must eat lots of carbohydrate from vegetables and no fat. That's a paradox. Now, so there is the Dean Ornish diet, which Clinton follows, from President Clinton follows. And I'm not sure it's ideal, but there's some evidence that will also reduce your heart attack risk. And why? Because it is very low fat, but it's not refined carbohydrates, it's vegetable fat. It's vegetable carbohydrates. And I suspect that there's something in it, that if you want to eat fat, you must not eat carbohydrates. And if you want to eat carbohydrates, you must not eat fat. But the difference is that if you eat fat, it's very easy to lose weight, and particularly if you're insulin resistant, because you're so satiated. Whereas people eating a vegetarian type diet may find it difficult to be satiated and may put on weight, and then they may have detrimental effects of putting on the weight. So I'm not suggesting that everyone should eat this diet, but as I've said before, the evidence is clear. If you're insulin resistant, you must restrict the carbohydrates if you want to live a full and healthy life.
Okay. Let's look at those. Let's look at carbs. Obviously we're talking about the no carbs. You're looking at bread and rice and pasta. And then carbs, you get carbs in certain vegetables that we eat. You're happy for people to be eating those carbs. Although at the back I know there's the list. And the red zone is something that you should avoid completely. But you're not telling people, it's not like a lot of, I think the Atkins, you weren't allowed to eat too many vegetables.
Yeah. That's right. You see, Atkins hit on the right view that if you have insulin resistance, the key is to manage how many carbohydrates you eat per day. He was absolutely adamant that you have to restrict your carbohydrates to below 50 grams a day, and that is key. So if you're profoundly insulin resistant like I am, or you're morbidly obese, you will only ever be healthy if you eat less than 50 grams of carbohydrate per day. Now, if you're eating that, it's literally, you cannot even have an apple, because that's 25 grams. It'll put you right out of balance. So then you have to restrict your vegetables very, very to leafy vegetables, because they are low in carbohydrate, but they're high in nutrients. So we say eat lots of vegetables which have lots of nutrients, which are great for you. They've got lots of fiber, but don't go for the carbohydrate-filled ones. Go for the ones on the green list in the book. And we are absolutely promoting vegetables. We're not promoting them. We're not promoting fruit, because fruit has got a lot of carbohydrates and it's no more nutritious than vegetables. So if you had to choose between a lettuce or a kale, for example, kale particularly, and an apple, you'd choose kale every time, because the nutrient value of kale is just much more than in an apple.
Okay. I hear you. I'm going to just bring someone onto the show as well, who's gone through this diet and just had the most extraordinary change of life and so many fantastic benefits, just to share the story, and then we'll continue, Prof, with some of the questions. And we have Billy Tosh on the line. Hi, Billy.
Hi, how are you doing?
Excellent, thank you. Thanks so much for coming onto the show.
No, you're more than welcome. Hello, Prof.
Hi, great hero, well done.
So tell us about your story, Billy. I mean, how did you come across this way of eating low carb, high fat?
I started my journey in July of 2012. I was morbidly obese. I topped the scales at over 160 kilos at that stage. I'd come back from a journey to Victoria Falls where I had battled to sit in my aircraft seat, and I had to ask for a belt extension to fasten the safety belt. And it was that flight back to South Africa that I decided that I could no longer carry on the way that I was. I mean, I know that I was at high risk for heart attack or a stroke or both. And on my return to South Africa, I went to my GP. I'd been diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic, so I fall into the category of highly insulin resistant. I had type 2 diabetes, and essentially I was on a very high medication of glucophage, 2,000 milligrams of glucophage a day to control my diabetes. But as a result, morbidly obese. My GP advised me that if I didn't do something within the next 6 months of carrying that kind of weight around, she said that I was at very high risk, and I had to do something about it. And I'd heard bits and pieces, from friends, etc., about Professor Tim Noakes and his new way of eating. And the starting point for me was the internet, and I came across some of Tim's works that he had published, etc. And that was, I guess, my epiphany moment. That's when the light went on, because everything that he was saying resounded with me and made complete sense. So I embarked within sort of 24 hours of gleaning as much information as I could. Probably about the 17th or 18th of July 2012, I decided that I fell into the category of a person that would need to eat under 25 grams of carbohydrate a day. And I embarked on a very strict carbohydrate controlled eating plan, where I guess my average carb intake was probably around 20 grams a day.
Sure. And
immediately, the weight loss began. I think it was 1.1 kgs in the first week, and then it just steadily climbed and climbed and climbed. And over a 28-week period, I lost over 80 kilos in a 28-week period.
My goodness. Wow. Yeah. Billy, you said that you were 160 kilograms.
160.
So you must have been eating a lot of food every single day. And
no,
now
not really.
Not really? Really?
No, and I'll tell you why. And that's probably, and Prof will probably back me up on this one. The problem is that if you're insulin resistant or a type 2 diabetic, small amounts of carbohydrate, 50 grams or more of carbohydrate, is going to spike your sugar levels to over that 5.5 level. You're going to be running sugar levels, if you're diabetic, in the sort of closer to 10, sometimes over 10, etc. And the problem with that is that when your body's producing insulin, your metabolism is not going to work at all. So you don't have to be particularly eating a lot of food if you're insulin resistant or diabetic, but if you're eating a carbohydrate-rich diet, your chance of losing weight is non-existent. You have to cut that carb. So you don't have to be physically eating a lot of food, but if you're eating the wrong kinds of food, you're never going to eat. You're never going to lose weight. And that's probably the most profound thing about it, is that if you're thinking that I didn't really eat a lot today, if you're carbohydrate resistant, it doesn't matter how little or how much you ate. If your blood sugar levels are spiked and your body's producing insulin, you're not going to lose weight.
Wow. Listen, 80 kilograms in that period of time is a lot of weight to lose. And I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, were you hungry? But with this new way of eating, according to what Professor says and what Jono says, you're not hungry. So tell us what your personal experience was like.
And then a lot of my friends have said, where did you get your energy from?
Oh, wow.
My energy obviously came from converting the fat that I was carrying around with me. I mean, my body burnt up the fat that I was carrying around with me at a rapid rate. And then my energy levels were supplemented by the protein that I was taking on a daily basis. For me, it wasn't that I was eating massive amounts of protein. I think that the major sort of impact that I had on my diet was that I was cutting that carb intake to under 25 grams a day. I mean, I was absolutely brutally rigid about the amount of carbs that I ingest. You know, so no breads, no pasta, no veg that grows below the ground, absolutely no sugar or even artificial sweetness, because I think that the mind, even though some of them are zero carbohydrate, they have the same effect on blood sugar levels as a normal carbohydrate would. It would spike your sugar levels. So that's no diet cool drinks, you know, none of these sugar-free diet drinks either, because they have the same effect as the full-blown sugar varieties would as well. So I wasn't hungry. It wasn't that I was hungry. I mean, I think that, you know, in the first week or two, I experienced
withdrawal. Did you feel a withdrawal?
Craving for bread. Sorry, what was that?
Like a withdrawal, as you say, craving for bread.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think initially, I mean, I probably dreamt of bread initially. I mean, that was but that lasted maybe 2 weeks. And then, you know, I haven't looked back. I mean, I can't tolerate bread in any form now. If I try to eat a piece of bread, my stomach goes into spasm. I can't tolerate bread or any form of sugar or sweetener at all. So I guess that, I mean, first off, I mean, I owe my life to Tim Noakes, and to, you know, the brave guys out there that have said that what we've been told in the past is wrong. I have no doubt that if I hadn't discovered Prof or his way of eating, that I probably wouldn't be here talking to you on the telephone today. You know, and that's a simple fact.
So, Prof, when you hear this, and as you said, I mean, so many people are coming back to you with these kind of stories, and go back to that time when everyone was so publicly criticizing you, it must be incredibly rewarding.
Yes, indeed, it is fabulous. And Billy's a special guy, because he had the courage to do it, you know, and to stick with it. And so it's been very excited to work with him and to see his fantastic response. And let's make the point that he's still as lean today as he was when he lost his weight a year ago. And the story that this diet is unsustainable is complete nonsense. It is highly sustainable if you have the intrinsic motivation and you benefit as much as I have and as Billy has.
Wonderful. Billy, thank you so much.
I think just in closing, you know, I think that the important thing is that I reached my target weight by pretty much the beginning of last year. I still eat a very few carbs. I mean, I try to keep my carbs at that 25 to sort of 30 gram level now. Not as rigid as I was when I was eating maybe 10 grams of carbs a day. But the important thing is that, as Prof has said, that my weight is maintained. In fact, I'm 3 kilos or 3.5 kilos lighter than I was after that initial 28 weeks. I think in total now I'm about 85 kilos lighter than I was when I started off. So it absolutely works. And more importantly for me is that it's cured my type 2 diabetes. I was advised by my GP or about 14 months ago by my GP that I was to stop all forms of diabetes medicine, my type 2 diabetes medicine, and that's also unheard of. I mean, it's a supposedly incurable disease.
You've claimed your health back.
Well, that's it, and that's as I said, that's why I Prof in my life.
Good for you, Billy. Quite an inspiration. I'm sure you've inspired many, many people listening. Congratulations, and thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you, and thanks very much to Prof. Noakes.
Thanks, Billy. So, bye-bye. So, Prof, I mean, wow, you know, all of these stories, it is incredible, but there is something that I've thought about is when you have lost all that weight because you have eliminated the carbs, so if you're going to continue eating that way, but you don't want to continue losing weight, so you, for example, so are you then a little bit more flexible? So can you sometimes go into the red zone? So every now and then, could you have a sweet potato, for example?
Thank you for asking. Absolutely not, because I'm type 2 diabetes.
Oh, right, of course, yes, you said.
And I monitor my glucose every minute of the day.
Okay.
So I can tell you exactly what it is now. I won't tell you, but it's nice and low. And if I was to take those carbohydrates, my glucose would shoot up, and it would be damaging my brain particularly. And that's what I'm trying to protect. It would damage my arteries. So no.
So it's not about the weight, it's about the health.
I'm so insulin resistant. that I absolutely cannot eat the carbohydrates.
But you're not still losing weight. I mean, you don't want to be losing weight.
No, that's the beauty. I've lost 20 kilograms total.
Wow.
And I'm now stable. I've been stable for 2 years or so. And the answer is, it doesn't matter whether I run 100 miles today or 100 meters. My weight will be exactly the same. And this is a really important point, that exercise doesn't influence weight loss. You can lose a bit of weight exercising because all you do is you burn up your excess carbs. And instead of going to fat, you use them as fuel. But it's much easier, just don't eat them in the first place, and then you won't need to do the exercise. So you exercise for fitness and for health, but not for weight control. You eat for weight control. That's the key.
Well, that's a new message as well. I mean, there are all these new messages, a new way of thinking and being. It's quite incredible. It really is incredible. It is a real meal revolution. So, Prof, you mentioned for vegetarians a little bit earlier how difficult it is to fill oneself up. I mean, I'm a vegetarian.
Yeah.
So, I always thought of the Atkins diet as something that I couldn't do because I don't eat all of those proteins. I mean, I do eat fish and I do, not fish, I do eat cheese and I eat eggs. But I've almost felt excluded, which is why I so enjoyed your book, because there are so many lovely recipes with just the right vegetables in it. But what advice would you give to vegetarians who want to embark on this new way of eating low carbs and high fat?
Firstly, I admire vegetarians for the stand they take on the way we treat animals. It's not acceptable, the way we treat animals. And that is part of this drive, is humane management of animals. And that there should be no feedlot feeding, because we know feedlot animals are not healthy.
Exactly.
And they're not going to make us healthy. We have to eat pasture-raised animals, which live as animals should live, with dignity and so on. And that's part of the message, and that we borrow that from the vegetarians. So I have absolute respect for the vegetarian position. So let's look at, I think that you would increase your health if you would just eat a little bit of protein from fish. There's something about animal protein that seems, some people need it. I'm not saying everyone needs it, but there are some vegetarians who struggle because they're not getting enough animal protein. So eggs are fantastic and dairy is great, but a little bit of protein from fish would be very helpful. And if you're eating like that, and you're eating the vegetables that the vegetarians eat, and excluding the grains, because I think the grains are not so healthy. I think we're going to find, although we're focusing now on sugar as being a problem, I think we're going to find wheat as a problem, because wheat has changed over the last 100 years or so. The hybridization process has changed the wheat, and it has different proteins in it. And there's really good evidence that we have great difficulty, our gut has great difficulty digesting wheat. And in fact, some people say we can't even digest wheat properly, and it's causing other problems. So I think wheat is going to become a problem in the future. So a vegetarian who's eating a lot of wheat might find problems, and cutting the wheat and going with the other vegetables would probably be a good idea.
But if you've got the right fat there, you shouldn't be feeling hungry, is what you're saying.
That's a very good point. So the diet we propose is not high protein. I don't propose that you should eat meat. I propose that you should eat lots of fat.
Okay.
And it turns out that, again, if you go back into our evolution, humans evolved eating the viscera of animals. That's what they focused on. So it's the viscera. If you are a meat-eating human, you really want to eat the viscera, which is the liver, which is full of nutrients, and the brains and the guts of the animals. That's what we should really be eating. We kind of stopped eating that maybe in the last 50 years, and we started eating meat, and that's not the best for us. It's definitely eating the nutrient-dense organs of the body.
How fascinating. I started off the show saying to everyone we're going to be challenging your belief system, and I think people are sitting up and taking notice and certainly thinking about what they're going to be eating and why they're eating it. So, Professor, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge, for doing all the research, for coming out with such a fantastic book. And, all of these people that have lost so much weight and that have claimed their health back, it's great. So I just thank you for sharing all of that with me and with the listeners.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate the chance to get this message out. And again, people make out that I'm some sort of evangelist. I'm not. I'm just giving you the medical science. And the people are providing the evangelism because they're finding that it's really helping and changing their lives as it changed Billy Tosh's life.
Wonderful. Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much.
you so
Take
much.
care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Professor Tim Noakes. And as he said, he's just looking at the science of it. And if you get the book, The Real Meal Revolution, it's all there. All the findings are there. The graphs are there. But it's written so wonderfully. It's quite amusing in the beginning with the titles and the type and the style of writing. But the topic is serious. The recipes are delicious. And, I hope you have been challenged during this show. I hope you are going to think about what you're eating, and sometimes what we're told so people can sell certain foods. Maybe we need to question it. And as Professor said, it may work for you, it may not. Maybe we need to know what your insulin resistance is like. But whatever you decide after this show, I do wish you strength and determination to go forward and claim your health and live a life filled with vitality and energy. I've so enjoyed being with you, and I look forward to being with you same time next week. For me, Niki Seberini. Goodbye.
Hi, my name is S.V. Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. Conversations with Niki was brought to you by Studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets.